Hello and welcome back to AP Psychology. I'm Miss Lee and we are still in the development unit. This is section 4, Adolescence. By the end of this video, you should be able to discuss maturational challenges in adolescence, including related family conflicts. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and grab your notes and let's get started. So once again, we're going to discuss the physical development that occurs during adolescence. Adolescence technically begins with puberty, and that happens somewhere between the ages of 11 and 14. During this time, the sexual reproductive organs mature. They become operational. Physical development has important implications for the way that adolescents feel about themselves. Self-image can be greatly affected by when one actually physically matures. Research has shown us that early maturing boys tend to do better in athletics, are generally more popular, and have a more positive self-concept. Yet they tend to have more difficulty in school, they commit more acts of delinquency, and become involved with substance abuse, seemingly due to the fact that because they look older, they are friends with older boys. However, in the long run, it seems that early maturing boys are typically more responsible and cooperative in later life. Early maturing girls are more sought after for dates and have better self-esteem than later maturing girls. Yet, early development can be a bit embarrassing for girls. Late maturation can produce psychological difficulty for both boys and girls. Boys who develop later are often smaller and less coordinated, which often leads to ridicule and being seen as less attractive, and in time, the boys may begin to view themselves in this way. Girls who develop later are at a disadvantage in junior high and early high school. They hold a relatively low social status and might be overlooked in dating, yet they report greater satisfaction with their bodies later in high school and college, mainly because late maturers tend to be tall and slim, which is the societal idea of beauty. So let's discuss cognitive development. So this is kind of a review from our last video. Usually by adolescence, one is in formal operational stage, according to Piaget, and they begin to reason hypothetically and deduce consequences. And this can lead to greater understanding and comprehension of more broad moral principles, which leads us to moral development. Okay, so one of our theorists here in the field of moral development is Lawrence Kohlberg. Lawrence Kohlberg believed that moral reasoning helps guide our judgments and our behavior. He proposed dilemmas to help people reason at different levels. And the theory assumes that people move through levels in kind of a fixed order. So again, this is a stage theory. It's important to remember that no real ages match up with the levels, but instead, he believed that one could not reach the highest level until at least 13 because cognitively they couldn't understand it before this point. Kohlberg believed that people progress through levels based on the research that he did by posing moral dilemmas for them to solve. So let's talk about Kohlberg's levels of moral development. The first one is pre-conventional. Someone who is at this level will perform actions based on rewards and punishment. They're very selfish and self-centered. They have very selfish and self-centered morality, and usually this is seen in young children. People at the next level, the conventional level, are interested in pleasing others and doing what is right by social laws. They consider more than just themselves. They think of family, loved ones, and society as a whole. And the last level of moral development, according to Kohlberg, is post-conventional. At this level, you use higher reasoning to guide behavior. You think about terms of justice, equality, equity, and basic human rights when making decisions. Basically, you live by the golden rule. Kohlberg didn't think that many people actually made it to this level of reasoning. So our next theorist has a really interesting backstory. This is Carol Gilligan, and interestingly enough, Gilligan was an instructor at Harvard, and while she was there, she actually worked with renowned developmental psychologist Erik Erikson, who is going to be introduced to you in the next portion of our video, and Lawrence Kohlberg. Gilligan became interested in Kohlberg's research on the moral development of children, which happened to use only boys as subjects. She had a problem with that, and so she conducted similar research on girls. So here's where it gets really interesting. She had different findings, and she argued that girls exhibit distinct patterns of moral development based on relationships and on feelings of care and responsibility for others. Basically, because of the social norms that they experience, they have different levels, different experiences of moral development. development. Her work soon inspired and informed a feminist-oriented movement known as the ethics of care. So that's Carol Gilligan. Okay, so let's talk about social development. Erik Erikson. Erikson's psychosocial development involves our changes in our interactions and our understanding of one another, as well as in our knowledge and understanding of ourselves as members of society. What he believed is really at the heart of what makes his theory so special and so important. He believed that the passage through the stage required resolution of a conflict. He actually used to call them crises. So he thought that you had to successfully resolve a crisis in order to move on to the next stage. And this is where the terminology from the world of psychology has really been picked up in our everyday vernacular. I think you're going to find some really familiar concepts. Okay, so we'll go through each of his stages. He has 8 stages. As I'm talking about them, I want you to consider what this actually looks like in the real world, in real life. First, you have trust versus mistrust. This is from birth until about 18 months. And the primary question or conflict or crisis is, can I trust the world? The child is at a very vulnerable stage and is dependent on others to meet their physical needs and the need for love. And so if the parents care and you become attached, think back to our last video, you'll develop a sense of trust and predictability. Inconsistent or lacking care will cause an infant to develop a sense of mistrust or paranoia. So it should make a lot of sense that it would be really important as an infant to have trust in your caregivers. The next stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. And this is from 18 months to 3 years old. Now, when you think about a kiddo this age, you think about toddlers. And this is very indicative of what a toddler is going to be acting like. Do I have some control over my life? If you think about the quintessential toddler, they're trying to get their way. They're maybe not quite getting their way, so they throw a fit. They're very headstrong. They have very strong opinions a lot of times. They want to do things on their own. If the parents set firm boundaries but let the child make some decisions, they will develop a will or a sense of independence, autonomy. They'll be able to act on their own. But if they're overly restricted, children will be unable to assert themselves. But on the other hand, if parents are too lenient, children become overly demanding and controlling. The child will also have a sense of shame or self-consciousness if this developmental stage is not navigated through successfully. The next stage is initiative versus guilt, and this is preschool up through maybe the first year or so of school. Initiative versus guilt, the child is in the stage where they're beginning to show some capability of doing things for themselves. They want to assert their independence, they're curious, they're developing this really strong imagination. If the parents react positively to these different behaviors, the child will feel confident to take risks and have self-confidence. If the parents react negatively, the child will lack self-sufficiency, have low self-esteem, and fear punishment. So the underlying question is, can the child begin to initiate things that they want to do? Can they initiate friendships? Can they initiate relationships? They're now able to communicate at a much higher level than they were in the previous 2 stages. And so initiation is really the foundation of this stage. So in this next video clip, although her age is probably in the autonomy versus shame and doubt, she's displaying some behaviors of wanting to do things for herself, which demonstrates the initiative versus guilt stage. You may have seen this before, but let's watch.
Worry about yourself. Worry about yourself.
Can I help?
No. I help. I don't. You can help when we're out to eat, okay? You can help when we are out to eat. Do you have this seeds?
Probably. You want me to help, Rose?
No. Thank you. No, thank you.
What do you want me to do?
Worry about yourself. Worry about yourself. I'll do this one, so gonna do that. You drive! Worry about yourself. Go drive! Go!
Okay, in the next stage, industry versus inferiority. The question that the individual is asking themselves is, am I capable of doing things socially? And at this point, you're looking at someone who is starting middle school, they are in upper elementary, they're comparing themselves with others socially and academically. They feel that if they can do tasks, they will have a sense of pride and that they fit in. But if they can't, they may feel inferior or not as good as others. The next stage is identity versus role confusion, and this is basically adolescence. The whole purpose of going through adolescence is to figure out who you are, figure out what your place is in this world. Going through the transition from child to adult, trying to discover who you are, what your strengths are, and what kind of roles you are best suited to play. In the last stage, an individual kind of figured out that they were good at certain things. This is where the individual is really trying to start laying down some framework for what they're going to do later on. If you have a sense of who you are and have a commitment to future roles, then basically you will have begun to form this identity. Or you could have confusion over what role you want to play, which can lead to an unstable identity and adoption of a socially unacceptable role. You may have heard of the term identity crisis. That's where this comes from. This is a classic Erikson term. During this stage, there may be pressure to identify with what one wants to do with one's life. And some of the key tasks here is to separate selves from parents. We tend to, at this point, rely more on our peer group, and it's a pivotal time period in a person's life. It can pave the way for continued growth and future development of personal relationships. Erikson believed that we have to find ourselves and figure out our role in this world before we could truly feel and express love. So do you agree or disagree? Think about that. Because the next stage is intimacy versus isolation. So basically the progression is you figure out who you are so that you can figure out who you want to be with. And this is the question of, can I love and be loved? This is in your early adulthood. And at this point, you're pondering entering a close, loving relationship. You tend to either develop intimacy and a sense of connectedness, or you develop isolation. You draw into yourself and avoid close emotional contact. The next stage is a very large stage, and it encompasses most of adulthood up through middle adulthood. This is generativity versus stagnation. And the question here is, am I productive and giving something back to the world? Are you successful in your job? There's a sense that making a difference through your children, through your job, through community involvement is going to be very rewarding. So you either are happy with life and feel that you've made a difference, you have a sense of accomplishment, or you feel worthless and have a preoccupation with your own needs. And this is the crisis that Erikson considers at each stage. It's a midlife crisis. So when you're in your midlife, have you made a difference? Have you generated something? Have you produced something? Have you left something for future generations? And Erikson's last stage is integrity versus despair. And this is considered somewhere around the age of 65. 65 used to be the age of retirement. So the question here is, has it all been worth it? When you look back over your life, has it been worth it? Have you made a difference? So when you look back at your life happily, you can have a strong sense of self-acceptance. Everything kind of comes together at the end. It's integrated. Or you develop a sense of despair. You look back at your life with frustration, regret, and disappointment. So we're going to watch this video about Erikson's 8 stages.
Erikson's theory of psychosocial development identifies 8 stages which a healthy individual should pass through from birth to death. At each stage, we encounter different needs, ask new questions, and meet people who influence our behavior and learning. Stage 1. Basic trust versus mistrust. As infants, we ask ourselves if we can trust the world, and we wonder if it's safe. We learn that if we can trust someone now, we can also trust others in the future. If we experience fear, we develop doubt and mistrust. The key to our development is our mother. Stage 2. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. In our early childhood, we experience ourselves and discover our body. We ask, is it okay to be me? If we are allowed to discover ourselves, then we develop self-confidence. If we are not, we can develop shame and self-doubt. Both parents now play a major role. Stage 3. Initiative versus guilt. In preschool, we take initiative, try out new things, and learn basic principles like how round things roll. We ask, is it okay for me to do what I do? If we are encouraged, we can follow our interests. If we are held back or told that what we do is silly, we can develop guilt. We are now learning from the entire family. Stage 4. Industry versus inferiority. Now we discover our own interests and realize that we are different from others. We want to show that we can do things right. We ask if we can make it in this world. If we receive recognition from our teachers or peers, we become industrious, which is another word for hard-working. If we get too much negative feedback, we start to feel inferior and lose motivation. Our neighbors and schools now influence us the most. Stage 5. Identity versus role confusion. During adolescence, we learn that we have different social roles. We are friends, students, children, and citizens. Many experience an identity crisis. If our parents now allow us to go out and explore, we can find identity. If they push us to conform to their views, we can face role confusion and feel lost. Key to our learning are our peers and role models. Stage 6. Intimacy versus isolation. As young adults, we slowly understand who we are, and we start to let go of the relationships we had built earlier in order to fit in. We ask ourselves if we can love. If we can make a long-term commitment, we are confident and happy. If we cannot form intimate relationships, we might end up feeling isolated and lonely. Our friends and partners are now central to our development. Stage 7. Generativity versus stagnation. When we reach our 40s, we become comfortable, use our leisure time creatively, and maybe begin contributing to society. Our concern is generativity. If we think that we are able to lead the next generation into this world, we are happy. If we did not resolve some conflicts earlier, we can become pessimistic and experience stagnation. People at home and at work are now who influences them most. Stage 8. Ego integrity versus despair. As we grow older, we tend to slow down and begin to look back over our lives. We ask, how have I done? If we think we did well, we develop feelings of contentment and integrity. If not, we can experience despair and become grumpy and bitter. Time to compare us with mankind. Erik Erikson was a German-American psychologist who, together with his wife Joan, became known for his work on psychosocial development. He was influenced by Sigmund and Anna Freud and became famous for coining the phrase identity crisis. Although Erikson lacked even a bachelor's degree, he served as a professor at Harvard and Yale.
And that is it for adolescence. In our next video, we'll be talking about adult development. I can't wait to see you then. Bye for now.